Welcome back, Lincoln Currency. Hey everyone, settle in, because today we're diving deep into a coin that most people toss in jars without a second thought, the 1973 Lincoln cent. I'm going to walk you through everything from what it looks like and why it was made, to its exact specifications, the little details collectors obsess over, the kinds of errors and varieties that can make a single 1973 penny worth far more than its face value, and how the myths about pennies worth millions start and spread. I'll be talking like I'm on camera, so imagine this as a long-form narrated piece, chatty, curious, and full of tiny digressions where I nerd out about metal, minting presses, and the moment a coin goes from pocket change to prized museum piece. Let's start with the basics you can confirm by picking up a magnifier and staring at the coin until your eyes water. The 1973 Lincoln cent is a Lincoln Memorial cent. The obverse, front, bears President Abraham Lincoln's profile, a design that dates back to Victor David Brenner's original 1909 design, but in its 1959 to 2008 Lincoln Memorial reverse era, the reverse shows the Lincoln Memorial design by Frank Gasparo. The designers' names matter to collectors because the design lineage is part of the coin's story and helps explain why small stylistic changes or die variations attract attention. If you want the nitty-gritty physical specs, the cent measures about 19.00 millimeters in diameter and weighs 3.11 grams. Its composition in 1973 was 95% copper and 5% zinc, giving it that warm reddish-brown look when relatively untuned. Those core technical details are cataloged by major grading and reference services and are the baseline by which weight anomalies or odd compositions are measured. PCGS +1 now. When I say weight anomalies, that leads to one of the first reasons collectors keep hunting through jars. The standard 1973 Lincoln cent should weigh right around 3.11 grams. If you find a 1973 coin that weighs significantly less, say 2.5 grams, collectors immediately suspect it might be a later zinc composition strike accidentally produced on older planchets, or more commonly, a different year planchet. 1982 and later pennies mostly weigh less at about 2.5 grams because of the post-1982 zinc core with copper plating. In short, weight that doesn't match 3.11 g on a 1973 date is a red flag that something unusual happened, and unusual often equals value. But unusual can also mean a modern counterfeit, or someone simply swapped in the wrong planchet, which is why expert authentication matters. Reputable grading houses and coin guides list the official specs and auction records, so any claim of an astronomical value starts with, "Does this coin match the official specs?" before anything else. PCGS +1. Let's talk production numbers and what common actually means. The mintage numbers for 1973 pennies are staggering. Billions were struck across U.S. mints that year. What that translates to in plain English is simple. Ordinary, circulated 1973 pennies are extremely common, and in typical circulated condition they're worth face value. Even many uncirculated examples often only fetch a modest premium unless they're in pristine mint state grades or show unusual characteristics. For example, reference aggregators and grading services report that typical uncirculated pieces might be worth a few dollars up to low tens of dollars depending on grade, but auction records for top-graded coins give us the real ceiling for ordinary strike examples. A single high-grade 1973 specimen may have an auction record in the low thousands, not millions. That's important because you'll often see sensational claims online about single pennies being worth $82 million, or similar. Those claims almost always collapse under scrutiny of mintage, population reports, and auction history. If you find someone asserting an $82 million valuation, treat it like a tabloid headline until you can see provenance, a legitimate third-party grade, and an actual auction result supporting the claim. PCGS +1. So where do real value spikes come from with 1973 pennies? There are three big categories: condition, aka grade, true mint errors, and extremely rare varieties. Condition is straightforward. The difference between worn from pocket use and mint state is enormous because collectors prize original surfaces, sharp strike, no contact marks, and a pleasing eye appeal. True mint errors, Think off-center strikes, double dies, clipped planchets, or striking on the wrong planchet, can be worth significant sums compared to face value. But the scale varies. An off-center 1973 penny missing 5% of the design might be worth a few tens to a few $100s, while one that's 50% off-center could tick up to the low hundreds. Extreme errors with strong eye appeal and rarity can sell for thousands. Again, error coin value is driven by rarity, grade, and collector demand. If an error is common or can be easily reproduced or faked, its value drops. There's a lively market for error coins, but it's also a space where hype and reality often collide. Coin value checker +1. I want you to visualize the coin for a second because part of the thrill of coin collecting is the physicality. On the obverse you see Lincoln's bust facing right. In God we trust. Above, the date to his right, 1973, and Liberty, to the left. Under the date, most 1973 cents coming from Denver have a tiny, D mint mark about the size of a pinprick. Philadelphia pieces generally had no mint mark at that time. On the reverse you see the Lincoln Memorial with the words, United States of America, across the top and 1 cent under the memorial. If you peer closely through a loop at the memorial, collectors and die specialists check details like the column's spacing, the appearance of the tiny statue of Lincoln inside the memorial, and hairlines or die cracks. Those micro features are where varieties hide. The designer's credits aren't just trivia. Brenner's and Gasparo's names appearing on reference pages help you track the era of design and when specific reverse types were used. PCGS. Now let's walk into the darker, murkier corner of the internet where these $82 million claims originate. Sensational valuations usually arise from one of a few places: a misinterpreted rumor about a famous sale, someone sees a YouTube thumbnail shouting an eye-popping number, a private sale that is unverified, or someone inflating a narrative to drive views, clicks, or watch time. In the coin hobby, authenticated auction results from Heritage, Stack's Bowers, or verified PCGS/NGC population reports are the gold standard. If you don't see a reputable auction house record, a PCGS or NGC census entry, or documented chain of custody, that $82 million number is almost certainly a myth. For 1973 pennies, established auction records and price guides show top results in the low thousands for even superb specimens, and several thousand for remarkable error pieces, nowhere near the seven-figure stratosphere. If an extraordinary sale had occurred for a 1973 penny for tens of millions, multiple major numismatic publications and auction houses would have reported it, and the provenance would be traceable. PCGS +1. That said, I love the human side of the myth machine. Imagine you're scrolling YouTube and you see a dramatic thumbnail. 1973 penny worth $82 million. Watch what happens. The video plays, the narrator shows a grainy image, and suddenly a viewer who doesn't know coin market mechanics is primed to believe that every 1973 penny in their drawer could be a jackpot. That drives searches, more videos get made, and a feedback loop of hype grows. This is why critical thinking matters in collecting. Always ask for provenance, documented sale results, and independent third-party certification. Grading companies like PCGS and NGC provide not only grades but population reports, so collectors can see how many of a certain grade exist. You can then compare population scarcity to auction demand to estimate realistic market value. PCGS +1. Let me pause for a collector's checklist, the practical part of this long ramble. If you're holding a 1973 cent and hoping it's the one that makes you rich, here's what to do. First, examine the weight with a precise digital scale. It should be 3.11 grams. Second, examine under magnification for doubling, double die obverse, off-center strikes, or planchet defects, clips, laminations, wrong planchet. Third, check for mint marks and any struck through marks or die breaks. Fourth, photograph the coin in high resolution and compare to known error types in reputable catalogs or auction archives. Fifth and most important, do not list or sell it as an $82 million coin based only. Imagine the camera zooming in close on the coin tray, the lighting adjusted so every copper glint of the 1973 cent dances across the screen. You pick up a loop, tilt the coin, and the light catches that soft reddish-brown tone that older copper cents develop. This moment, that tiny gleam, is why collectors keep searching. Because once in a while, a small imperfection made at the mint decades ago becomes a gateway to discovery. In this section we'll walk through real examples of errors that have been confirmed, the difference between hype and legitimate rarity, how to photograph and evaluate coins, and what the broader market actually looks like for Lincoln cents from 1973. Start with the most famous variety family of all, doubled dies. Doubling happens when the die that imprints the design onto blank planchets receives more than one impression from the master hub that isn't perfectly aligned. Every coin struck from that die carries the doubled image. On 1973 cents, strong double die obverse are not common, but mechanical or machine doubling, where vibration during striking makes letters look doubled, is. True doubled dies show rounded, distinct secondary images, especially visible on the date, or letters like Liberty and In God We Trust. Machine doubling looks flat and shelf-like. Collectors new to the hobby sometimes mistake one for the other, list the coin online as a super rare doubled die worth millions, and the myth cycle repeats. When grading services catalog real double die examples, they note them specifically. If you can't find a matching variety in recognized reference lists or auction archives, it's probably not the real thing. Now let's picture another kind of minting blunder, off-center strikes. The die and planchet need perfect alignment, but sometimes the planchet is slightly off. A 5% off-center 1973 cent will show a slightly thick rim on one side and a thin one on the other. A 50% off-center strike creates a dramatic crescent shape where part of the design is missing and the blank planchet shows through. Collectors love these because the error is obvious at first glance. No microscope required. The value, though, depends on how much of the design is visible, whether the date is fully shown, and the condition. Common off-center strikes might fetch tens of dollars. Sharply struck, large off-center coins showing the complete date can sell for a few hundred. Compare that to routine examples, and you understand why error hunting is addictive. You're looking for visual drama backed by scarcity. Clipped planchets come next. Picture the long strips of copper alloy punched by a blanking press to make planchets. If the strip advances improperly, the blanking punch can overlap a previous hole, creating a crescent-shaped clip. When that clipped blank goes through the rest of the minting process, you get a coin with a distinct curve missing section. True mint-made clips show metal flow toward the clip and a Blakesley effect, a weakly struck rim opposite the missing area. Counterfeit or damaged coins usually lack those signs. 1973 cents with authentic curved clips exist, and, depending on size and condition, can bring anywhere from a few dollars to triple digits. Then there are struck on wrong planchet errors, the holy grail for many. Occasionally the mint's machinery mixes blanks for different denominations. A 1973 Lincoln cent struck on a dime planchet would be smaller and made of a copper-nickel alloy, weighing around 2.27 grams instead of 3.11. Verified wrong planchet errors are rare but documented. They're exactly the sort of pieces that grading services encapsulate, and that auction houses love because they're so visually and scientifically interesting. Such coins have fetched four-figure sums, though not tens of millions. Again, the key word is verified. Now, how do you evaluate and photograph a coin so you can tell whether it's worth professional submission? Start with clean, diffuse lighting, no direct flash. Hold the coin by the edges over a neutral background. Use a macro lens or phone macro attachment. Focus on the fields, the flat background areas, and the details around the date and mint mark. Take shots at slight angles to reveal luster and any doubling. Never clean the coin. Residue removal scratches the surface and kills value. What grading services grade highest is original, untouched surface with natural toning. Once you have crisp photos, compare them to images in trusted databases, PCGS Coinfax, NGC Variety Plus, Heritage Auctions Archives. If your coin matches none of the known major varieties, that doesn't automatically make it new and priceless. It might simply be normal. Let's pan out and talk economics. The Lincoln Cent series is one of the most collected U.S. coin series. which means demand is broad. But because so many coins exist, supply is enormous. Value clusters around condition extremes and true rarities. Price guides that aggregate auction data show ordinary circulated 1973 cents remain at face value. Typical uncirculated grades bring small premiums. Top population graded examples, meaning MS67 red and above, can sell for hundreds or low thousands because they're scarce in that flawless color and luster state. Proof coins struck for collectors, the mirror-like specimens sold by the mint, have their own market. Perfect proofs, PR70, have achieved high auction results, but even those are a far cry from multimillion-dollar fantasies. Why do outrageous numbers like worth $82 million keep circulating? Partly because people conflate total market size with individual coin price. The combined market for all Lincoln cents and all varieties might well involve tens of millions of dollars annually, but that doesn't mean one coin commands that sum. Also, misinformation spreads quickly online. Someone might see a headline about a 1943 copper cent, a genuinely rare error that has sold for 6 or 7 figures, and assume the same could happen to any copper coin from the 1970s. The 1943 copper cent was special because nearly all 1943 cents were steel. A few copper planchets were left in the machines. That's documented rarity. The 1973 cent, by contrast, was part of a standard copper issue. Unless a planchet mix-up or major double die occurred, it remains common. Let's keep digging into the artistry of the design because it's easy to overlook how much meaning hides in that tiny space. Victor David Brenner's original Lincoln portrait from 1909 was based on a photograph of a sculpture he had done years earlier. He wanted Lincoln to look contemplative, not heroic, the image of a thinker. The inscriptions, "In God We Trust, Liberty," and the date framed the portrait like a halo of words. Frank Gasparo's reverse, introduced in 1959, depicted the Lincoln Memorial in a style meant to mirror the architectural gravitas of the building itself. If you look closely, you can actually see a tiny engraved statue of Lincoln between the central columns, a neat Easter egg. The symbolism, a monument to unity and memory, struck millions of times to circulate in daily commerce. Understanding that design intention deepens appreciation even for common pieces. History adds another layer. 1973 was part of the broader copper age of U.S. cents, before the metal composition change in the early 1980s. The cost of copper was rising, and the mint was already researching cheaper materials. That gives 1973 cents a link to the end of an era, still copper-heavy, still hefty compared with the later zinc cents that sound lighter when dropped on a tabletop. You can even perform a simple ping test: copper cents ring with a low chime, zinc ones with a dull click. Collectors love these sensory details because they connect history to touch and sound. As for market currents, consider how grading companies act as anchors of trust. When a coin is submitted, graders independently assess it under magnification, assign a numeric grade, and seal it in a tamper-evident holder with a unique certification number. That number links to an online database showing grade, variety, and population. Buyers rely on those databases to compare scarcity. For instance, if only a few dozen MS67 red 1973 cents exist, those become desirable to registry set builders, collectors who compete to assemble top-graded sets. Prices for those scarce high-grade examples can rise because of competition. It's a game of micro-scarcity within macro-abundance. Suppose you actually had a unique experimental 1973 cent struck on an off-metal planchet never documented before. Could it theoretically command a huge sum? Possibly, if authenticated and if collectors agreed it represented a genuine mint error of great historical significance. Even then, realistic high-end coin prices rarely leap straight to 8-digit figures. Record-setting U.S. coin auctions, like those for the 1933 Double Eagle or 1794 Flowing Hair Dollar, involve historically momentous pieces with decades of provenance. They achieve millions because of rarity plus narrative plus demand, not because they're random common date coins. You know, one of the things that keeps me fascinated by coins like the 1973 cent isn't just the metal or the numbers. It's the psychology behind the chase. Let's slow things down and think about what actually happens when someone hears that a penny might be worth millions. Instantly, the imagination fires up. People start rifling through jars, pulling open drawers, dumping change on the kitchen table. It's a rush, part nostalgia, part treasure hunt. That feeling is powerful, and it's exactly why stories about pennies worth $82 million spread so fast. They promised that something ordinary could be extraordinary. But the deeper truth, and what makes real collectors keep going, is that the real reward isn't luck, it's knowledge. Collectors talk about the thrill of the hunt, but behind that phrase lies something a bit deeper: pattern recognition. You start training your brain to notice differences that most people never see. On a 1973 cent, that could be the thickness of the numerals, the texture of the fields, or a faint die crack. Over time, this becomes almost meditative. You pick up a coin, flip it under a light, and your eyes instantly zero in on anything unusual. It's a kind of mindfulness practice, except instead of focusing on breathing, you're focusing on Lincoln's ear or the alignment of the memorial columns. And then there's the community side. Go on any coin collecting forum or social group and you'll see endless discussions about small details. Someone will post a blurry photo and ask, "Is this a double die?" Within minutes, a dozen replies appear, analyzing the image pixel by pixel. One person brings up known die varieties, another posts comparison shots, and someone else gently explains that what they're seeing is machine doubling. That interaction, that willingness to teach and learn, is what actually builds the hobby. It's how beginners evolve into experts. The 1973 cent serves as a perfect entry point because it's common enough that anyone can find one, but complex enough in its varieties to teach real diagnostic skills. Now, let's talk about how technology has completely changed this landscape. Decades ago, you needed a magnifier, a lamp, and a lot of patience. Today you can snap a macro photo with your phone and upload it to an app that cross-references known varieties. There are even AI-powered tools that compare your image against databases from PCGS, NGC, and major auction archives. These tools can tell you within seconds if your 1973 cent resembles a documented error type. For someone just getting started, that's huge. It doesn't replace expertise, but it shortens the learning curve. Modern collectors use spreadsheets, digital catalogs, and online marketplaces to track sales and build collections virtually. The old image of the lone collector with a magnifying glass and a dusty album is still romantic, but the modern version involves screens, data, and global connectivity. Think about that for a second. A coin minted in 1973, designed with 19th century artistry, is now part of a digital ecosystem that stretches around the world. You can watch a live auction stream from your phone, bid on a high-grade proof cent, and have it shipped across continents. This intersection of analog history and digital trade gives coins new life. It also means information moves faster, including misinformation. Every few months a new video or post claims that a certain 1973 penny sold for tens of millions. Often it's a mix-up between genuine era coins of other years or simple exaggeration designed to drive clicks. For seasoned collectors, debunking those myths becomes a kind of public service. Let's get practical again and look at how to build a sensible collection around the 1973 cent. Start by collecting by mint: Philadelphia, no mint mark, Denver, D, and the San Francisco proofs, S. Each has slightly different characteristics. A full run of those three in top condition makes a nice mini set. Next, learn to grade. The difference between MS63, MS65, and MS67 might sound like small increments, but visually they're dramatic under the light. Get familiar with terms like red, red-brown, and brown, because color classification heavily affects price. A fully red 1973 cent that's been properly stored can outprice a brown one many times over. Protect them in inert holders or capsules. Copper reacts quickly with air, so minimizing exposure preserves that brilliant tone. When you talk about the market value of coins like this, it helps to understand that there isn't a single fixed number. Coins are like miniature pieces of art. Value depends on buyer interest, timing, and condition. A grading population report might show that only a handful of MS67 examples exist, and if 2 registry set collectors need one to complete their set, the price at auction can spike dramatically. But when those collectors finish their sets, the next sale might be lower. That's market fluctuation, not magic. Knowing that keeps you grounded and helps you avoid chasing unrealistic prices. Let's step into a hypothetical story to keep it lively. Imagine someone, let's call her Maria, finds an old coin jar in her late grandfather's workshop. Inside are hundreds of pennies, including a bunch from the early 1970s. She reads online that a 1973 cent might be worth $82 million and feels a jolt of hope. She dumps the coins on the table, sorts them by date, picks out every 1973 and 1973D, and starts inspecting them. Under a magnifier, she notices that one looks a little thicker in the lettering. Excited, she posts a photo to a collector forum. Within an hour, helpful members explain that it's mechanical doubling, not a true double die, and show her comparison images. She learns something new, joins the community, and decides to start collecting more systematically. Fast forward a year, and Maria isn't chasing myths anymore. She's studying die varieties, buying a scale and a microscope, and attending coin shows. That's the real magic. A rumor about an impossible jackpot transforming into genuine curiosity and education. If you've ever visited a coin show, you know the sensory overload. Rows of cases filled with glimmering metal, the hum of conversation, the soft clink of coins being handled. At one table, someone might be selling 1973 proof sets still sealed in their original mint packaging. At another, you'll see slabs graded by PCGS with tiny labels reading MS66RD. Dealers and collectors trade not just coins but stories. Who owned it, where it came from, what makes it special. When a true mint-era 1973 cent appears, it becomes a magnet for attention. Everyone crowds around, debates authenticity, and checks references. That communal scrutiny is what keeps the market honest. Let's talk a bit about how grading works behind the scenes. Professional graders operate in controlled lighting, with microscopes and magnifiers set to specific magnification levels. They don't just glance at the coin, they evaluate luster, strike, surface preservation, and color. Multiple graders independently assign scores, and a finalizer reconciles differences. The resulting grade, say, MS65 red, encapsulates consensus and expertise. That's why a graded coin commands a premium. It's been vetted. The slab also protects the coin from handling damage. For modern collectors, sending a 1973 cent to a grading service isn't about expecting millions. It's about preserving and authenticating a small piece of history. The economics of the copper cent also deserve a closer look. Each 1973 coin contains about 3 grams of mostly copper, and while you can't legally melt US cents for metal value, the intrinsic worth gives them a certain solidity. Compare that with the zinc cents introduced later, which corrode faster and feel lighter. Some collectors specifically build pre-1982 copper hoards for nostalgia and heft. But again, no matter how much copper you stockpile, it won't approach millions in value. It's about tactile connection, the weight of history in your palm. Let's revisit the myth of astronomical prices. Why do such numbers seem believable? Because people occasionally read about the 1943 copper cent or the 1794 flowing hair dollar fetching millions and assume all old coins might do the same. But rarity is everything. The 1943 copper cent exists because of a specific wartime error when steel planchets replaced copper. A few copper blanks remained, making those coins genuinely rare. By contrast, the 1973 cent had a mintage in the billions. The only ones commanding significant premiums are those with spectacular errors or near-perfect grades. So now that you know how to handle, store, and judge the 1973 cent itself, let's step back and look at the bigger picture, the market that surrounds it. Coin collecting isn't static. It breathes, it pulses, it reacts to culture, economics, even to internet trends. When someone posts a video claiming a common penny is worth millions, web searches spike, coin shops get calls, and for a few weeks prices on even ordinary pieces may edge up because interest has surged. Then, just as quickly, the excitement fades and values return to normal. Understanding those cycles helps you ride the wave without being swept away by it. Think of the hobby like a living ecosystem. At the top are high-end collectors and institutional buyers chasing registry set perfection, coins graded MS68 red or PR70 deep cameo. In the middle are everyday hobbyists filling albums, chasing varieties, and learning the ropes. At the base are casual searchers lured by viral stories. All three layers feed each other. The newcomers bring energy, the mid-level collectors provide depth, and the elite buyers set benchmarks. The 1973 cent lives in that middle space, abundant enough for beginners, nuanced enough for experts. Let's get into data for a moment. When grading companies publish population reports, they're basically censuses. Each slabbed coin gets logged by date, mint, and grade. So if a report shows, for example, that only 50 MS67 red 1973 D cents have been certified and none higher, that defines scarcity at the top end. The next collector who wants the finest known must compete for one of those 50, pushing auction prices up. But if the population later doubles because more examples surface, prices can settle back down. That's why population numbers and market value dance in constant feedback. The same logic applies to proof coins. The San Francisco Mint produced polished proof cents for collectors, sold in sets. They were struck multiple times with specially prepared dies, giving them mirror fields and frosted relief. A perfect PR70 DCM 1973's proof might sell for hundreds, occasionally more if two collectors lock horns in bidding. Yet those coins were never circulation issues. They were purpose-made collectibles, time capsules of the mint's craftsmanship. When you show one under studio lights, the contrast between mirror and frost glows like jewelry. Viewers love that. It turns a technical discussion into visual poetry. Let's rewind again to economics. Inflation, metal prices, and nostalgia all influence how people view old coins. Copper's rise in commodity markets sometimes sparks renewed interest in pre-1982 cents because their intrinsic metal content seems valuable. But legality matters. Melting US cents for profit is prohibited. Still, the idea that these older, heavier coins contain real metal gives them a psychological premium. When you script your video, you can use that as a storytelling hook. The last era of true copper pennies, minted before cost-cutting changed everything. Another crucial topic is provenance. Serious value only emerges when a coin's authenticity and history are documented. That's why auction houses provide detailed lot descriptions, weight, diameter, die markers, pedigree. If a coin ever did sell for an outrageous sum, the documentation would exist. You could trace the transaction, the certification number, the publicity. For 1973 cents, no such record of multimillion-dollar sales exists in the databases of Heritage, Stack's Bowers, or any major venue. That single fact cuts through most rumors instantly. Teaching viewers how to verify provenance empowers them to check claims instead of just believing them. Now, let's examine market psychology again. In every collectible field, stamps, art, trading cards, myths of hidden fortune drive initial interest. The difference between speculation and scholarship is follow-through. Once people realize that not every old item is priceless, the serious ones stay and learn. Those are the collectors who sustain the hobby. The 1973 cent, with its modest value and huge supply, is like a training coin for developing discernment. It teaches patience, pattern recognition, and respect for evidence. Imagine filming a segment where you visit a coin shop. Glass cases line the walls, trays glint under LED lights. You pick up a slab 1973 DMS 66 red, the label neat and precise. The dealer explains how it earned that grade, pointing to the spotless fields and the sharp strike on Lincoln's coat. Then he shows a circulated example pulled from a cash drawer, same date, same design, but dulled and scratched. Side by side, the difference is obvious. Viewers instantly grasp why condition matters more than age. That single visual demonstration teaches more than any chart. Speaking of charts, it's useful to explain how auction data accumulates. Every major sale is public record, and those records feed into price guide averages. When someone claims, a 1973 penny sold for $82 million, check those databases. You'll find highest confirmed results measured in hundreds or low thousands, not millions. That transparency protects buyers and discourages scammers who prey on misinformation. So, in your script, encourage viewers to verify, even provide on-screen references to official price guides and population reports. Let's take a moment to appreciate the aesthetic side again. Under magnification, the Lincoln Memorial design has architectural rhythm, evenly spaced columns, tiny steps leading up, and the miniature statue of Lincoln centered in the doorway. Collectors call it coin microarchitecture. Filming those details with slow pans and shallow depth of field turns the humble cent into a work of art. Combine that imagery with a calm narration about American symbolism, and suddenly your audience feels the weight of history instead of just hearing numbers. From art back to numbers, grading services occasionally reevaluate coins. A coin graded MS65 red decades ago might be resubmitted today and receive MS66 red, instantly increasing its market price. That possibility fuels resubmission trends. But it also teaches humility. Grades, while professional, are still judgments within tolerance ranges. Understanding that prevents unrealistic expectations. Now, let's discuss investment perspective. Some people collect purely for pleasure, others see coins as tangible assets. The safe route is knowledge-based collecting. Buy coins you enjoy, within your budget, focusing on certified examples with stable demand. For 1973 cents, that might mean cherry-picking a top-grade example for your registry set or buying a spectacular era piece with documented authenticity. Those have resale potential. But turning pocket change into millions? That belongs to fairy tales. Use your platform to remind viewers that genuine success in numismatics comes from education, not luck. The cultural resonance of Lincoln on the cent also deserves reflection. Since 1909, his image has symbolized integrity and perseverance. During the 1970s, that symbolism quietly bridged turbulent times, the Vietnam War ending, Watergate unfolding, economic uncertainty rising. The Lincoln Memorial reverse echoed themes of unity and remembrance. When you hold a 1973 cent, you hold a tiny token of that national mood. Highlighting that human context deepens appreciation beyond money. Let's weave in some real collector stories to humanize it. A retired teacher keeps a small box labeled pennies with personality, each coin with odd toning, die cracks, or off-center strikes. None are worth fortunes, but every piece is documented with a note card describing where it was found. That archive becomes a personal museum. Another collector, a teenager armed with a digital microscope, catalogs cents from pocket change online, sharing high-resolution images and inviting commentary. These small acts of curiosity keep numismatics alive far more effectively than viral myths. At this stage of the video. And as we move into the heart of the story, it's worth pausing to notice what has happened in our imagination. A single 1973 Lincoln cent, something you could have spent on a piece of candy, has now become a window into design, economics, psychology, technology, and culture. The more you learn, the more you realize that even the smallest artifact can tell the story of a nation. The copper tone, the familiar profile of Abraham Lincoln, the simple words, "In God we trust," and "E pluribus unum." All of those details were choices, deliberate signals from a mint that has been crafting America's circulating art for over 2 centuries. Every little nick and tone mark is part of a silent diary, written in metal. Imagine the rhythm of minting day back in 1973. Blanks of copper alloy traveling along conveyor belts, blank planchets fed into the presses, each struck by steel dies with thousands of pounds of pressure. The clatter and ring echo through the Denver and Philadelphia mints, the smell of machine oil in the air, operators checking samples for sharpness of strike. Each coin tumbles out bright red, gleaming, indistinguishable from the one before it. None of those workers could have guessed that 50 years later, people around the world would still be studying these very cents, zooming in on every detail, asking what makes one ordinary and another extraordinary. The process itself is almost poetic, repetition creating uniqueness through tiny imperfections. If you could hold a time lapse of all those coins passing through hands, wallets, vending machines, and piggy banks over 5 decades, you'd see a glowing river of copper moving through American life. That's the hidden romance of numismatics. A 1973 penny that once bought gum in a gas station might now sit in a protective capsule, admired under LED light. The transition from circulation to collection is what gives any coin its second life. And when you tell that story in a video, when you hold up that same coin and say, "This piece of metal has survived 50 years of history," people listen differently. They start to feel the connection instead of just hearing about money. Let's dive into the design symbolism one more time because the artistry deserves it. Victor David Brenner's portrait of Lincoln has remained largely unchanged since 1909 because it captures dignity without pomp. The subtle curve of the cheek, the furrow of the brow, they express thoughtfulness, restraint, moral weight. On the reverse, Frank Gasparo's Lincoln Memorial design, introduced in 1959, replaced the wheat ears. It's a miniature monument rendered in perfect geometry, every column representing unity and equality. When filmed under raking light, those lines shimmer like strings on an instrument. The composition creates rhythm, horizontal steps, vertical columns, central figure. You could almost describe it in musical terms: repetition, harmony, and balance. Collectors often forget that coins are miniature sculptures. Every relief, every contour, is a decision of depth and texture. Even the negative spaces, the flat fields, are part of the art because they frame the design. When a coin is struck sharply, the light dances across those surfaces. That's why grading includes not only the absence of marks but also the quality of strike and luster. Luster isn't just shininess, it's the way metal crystals reflect light from the original minting pressure. The 1973 cents, when fresh, show a swirling, almost satiny luster that moves like ripples when you tilt the coin. Capture that on camera and viewers can literally see what mint state means. Now, since we've already debunked the exaggerated price myths, let's talk about how value really accumulates over time. The coin market is like any other art market: confidence, rarity, and narrative drive demand. If a single coin becomes famous for an unusual error or backstory, its price can rise exponentially because collectors attach meaning to it. A well-publicized double-die discovery, for example, can transform a few cents into thousands because it represents a distinct chapter of mint history. But these are documented, verifiable phenomena. The so-called $82 million sales attached to 1973 cents have never been authenticated or recorded by any credible auction house. The real, big money, here is metaphorical. It's the collective cultural value of millions of people learning, collecting, and sharing. There's also something to be said about patience. Coins, like stories, ripen with time. A collector who puts away bright red uncirculated 1973 cents today, properly stored, might have something notably rarer decades from now simply because fewer pristine examples will survive. That's the long game of preservation. And it's a lesson for audiences, too. Value doesn't appear out of thin air, it's cultivated. When you make your video, emphasize that principle, that care, curiosity, and respect for detail can turn ordinary objects into legacies. Another dimension worth exploring is the sensory side of collecting. The faint metallic scent when you open an old album, the cool weight of a roll of cents, the soft click as they slide against each other. These experiences ground the hobby in reality. They remind you that money, for all its abstraction in digital form, started as tangible metal shaped by human hands. The 1973 cent sits at the threshold of that transformation, old enough to carry the classic copper tone, yet modern enough to belong to our lifetime. When people watch your video, you're not just teaching them facts, you're reawakening sensory memory, the sound of change in a pocket, the gleam of a coin in sunlight. Let's consider how storytelling sustains attention. A strong narrative arc could follow a simple sequence: discovery, curiosity, investigation, revelation, reflection. Start with the legend of the multimillion-dollar penny, that's the hook. Move into the history of the cent and the minting process, that's the foundation. Then show the tools and techniques used to evaluate a coin, magnifiers, scales, grading charts, letting viewers feel like detectives. The revelation comes when you unveil the truth that the real value lies in knowledge and heritage. Finally, reflection ties it together, what this humble cent tells us about value, patience, and craftsmanship. That structure keeps even a non-collector watching till the end. Imagine closing your eyes and picturing the flow of decades around this coin. It was minted when rotary phones were still common, when televisions were bulky boxes and cars drank gasoline without restraint. Through recessions, booms, and technological revolutions, the same little cent persisted almost unchanged. That durability is part of its charm. We live in a world where everything updates constantly, but a 1973 penny looks almost identical to the one minted today. It's continuity in a disposable age. Maybe that's why the Lincoln cent endures as America's longest-running coin design, because it offers a sense of stability amid change. Now think about the future audience. Kids who see your video might go rummaging through their parents' coin jars, not for greed but for wonder. They might discover a curiosity about history, art, or economics. A single copper disc can open doors to metallurgy, design principles, and even the physics of striking pressure. That's education hidden inside entertainment. And it all begins with a story told sincerely, not inflated with impossible numbers but enriched with real passion. There's also an ethical aspect to remember. Whenever misinformation spreads, like false claims of astronomical coin values, it can lead people to waste money on scams or unnecessary grading fees. As a content creator, you have the opportunity to protect your audience by showing them how to fact-check. Demonstrate side-by-side comparisons between legitimate auction listings and sensational headlines. Explain how genuine value is documented through certification numbers and photographs. In doing so, you become a trusted guide, turning viral hype into constructive curiosity. Returning once more to the 1973 cent itself, it's worth describing how a perfect example looks under magnification. The rims are sharp, the letters crisp, the field smooth and reflective but not mirrored, the portrait slightly frosted from the strike. The mint mark on a Denver example sits neatly beneath the date, a line just right of center. A true mint state coin shows no rub on Lincoln's cheek or jawline, and the memorial steps remain fully defined. When you narrate that level of detail, you give viewers the thrill of expert observation. They start to see like collectors see, and then there's the emotional undercurrent. Many collectors remember who gave them their first penny collection: a parent, a teacher, a grandparent. Those moments become time capsules of love and patience. A 1973 cent sitting in a little blue Whitman folder can carry more sentimental value than any theoretical $82 million figure. It's not about wealth, it's about connection. Every coin passed through hands, through lives. When you tell that truth, even casual viewers feel it. And now, as we journey even deeper into the world of the 1973 Lincoln cent, something remarkable begins to emerge, not from the coin itself, but from the reflection it casts on human curiosity. Every generation seems to rediscover the cent and assign it new meaning. In the 1970s, it was the most ordinary object imaginable. In the 1980s, as copper prices rose, people began hoarding them. In the 2000s, the internet turned them into icons of nostalgia. And today, in the digital age, they've become symbols of authenticity in a virtual world. The 1973 penny has, in its quiet way, witnessed every stage of that evolution. It's the same metal, but the stories we attach to it keep changing. When you hold a 1973 cent under bright light, what you're really seeing is a conversation between design and time. The surfaces tell you how the metal has aged, how it's been handled, how air and skin and humidity have interacted with it. The small scratches, the gentle fading of the red tone into brown, the micro-abrasions around the rim, they're the marks of living history. A brand new coin might impress with perfection, but an aged coin speaks. It tells stories that numbers cannot. Maybe that's why so many collectors feel emotionally attached even to common pieces, because each one has survived its own journey through countless human hands. The year 1973 also carries broader historical context that adds richness to the narrative. America was shifting, the Vietnam War drawing to a close, the Watergate scandal looming, inflation rising. Gasoline cost 38 cents a gallon. The average home sold for $32,000. The penny still bought small items, and yet, it also symbolized inflation's creeping reality. Minting billions of them was a statement of trust in the system, a belief that the smallest unit still mattered. When you think about it that way, the 1973 cent is not just metal, it's a social artifact reflecting economic philosophy. Every time a government issues coins, it reaffirms faith and value itself. In a quiet way, the cent's persistence mirrors Lincoln's moral endurance. His portrait, unchanging, represents stability through turbulence. The Lincoln Memorial reverse reinforces that same message, a structure of columns, resilient, symmetrical, standing firm. When you narrate that parallel in your video, it resonates beyond numismatics. Viewers sense that this isn't only a story about collecting, it's about how culture encodes meaning in the everyday. That's what separates a good coin story from a great one, the ability to connect the micro and the macro, the physical detail and the philosophical echo. Now let's shift briefly into the tactile experience again, because sensory storytelling makes the video immersive. Picture yourself sitting at a wooden desk. A small lamp casts a warm cone of light over an array of coins. You pick up a 1973 cent with tweezers, set it under a magnifying lens, and slowly rotate it. The fields glint, the edges flash, and the portrait emerges like a relief sculpture. You describe what you see, the fine grain of the copper, the raised lettering of Liberty, the subtle imperfections that make this coin unique. For a moment, your viewers aren't watching a screen anymore. They're right there with you, hearing the quiet clink of metal, the whisper of movement, feeling the same fascination you do. That's the art of narration, turning observation into shared experience. As the camera pulls back, you can talk about how these coins have evolved in composition. The 1973 cent was still made primarily of copper, about 95% copper and 5% zinc. 9 years later, in 1982, the U.S. Mint switched to zinc cores with thin copper plating to cut costs. That shift changed everything. Weight dropped from 3.11 grams to 2.5 grams, sound changed, even how coins aged changed. Copper cents like the 1973's darkened with rich, organic tones. Zinc ones corrode differently, often bubbling under the plating. This distinction gives the older coins a sort of authenticity, a weight, a sound, a texture that newer ones lack. When you drop a 1973 cent on a wooden surface, it rings with a low, satisfying tone, while a zinc penny gives a dull click. That sound alone tells you which era you're holding. From an economic angle, you can explore how the cost of minting each cent has long exceeded 1 cent itself. The irony is striking, spending more to produce something than its face value. Yet governments continue to do it because the penny carries sentimental and symbolic importance. It's a link to national memory. Removing it would mean erasing something almost invisible yet deeply embedded in culture. For coin collectors, that continuing paradox adds philosophical value. The cent endures not because it's efficient, but because it's loved. In your narration, you could then pivot toward the global view, how other nations have phased out their lowest denominations, while the US holds on. Canada eliminated its penny in 2012, yet Canadian collectors still treasure the older coins. Australia did the same in the 1990s. And yet in the United States, the humble cent continues to circulate, echoing Lincoln's quiet persistence. For anyone studying economic symbolism, that endurance says something profound about cultural identity, that sometimes tradition outweighs practicality. Returning to the market side, it's worth explaining how coin prices actually move. A rare discovery or error can create a temporary spike, but sustained value comes from established demand and limited supply. For the 1973 cent, that means top-graded pieces and verified mint errors. Those include double strikes, clipped planchets, and off-center strikes. Some of these errors can fetch hundreds or even a few $1,000s, depending on severity and condition. But the key word is authenticated. Grading companies like PCGS and NGC exist precisely to confirm what's genuine. The real thrill for collectors is not chasing mythical millions, but uncovering legitimate rarity through observation and research. Think about how you might dramatize that in your video. Maybe you show footage of a mint error, a coin struck slightly off-center, creating a crescent of blank metal along the rim. You zoom in and explain why this happened, perhaps a misaligned die or planchet feeding error. Viewers see the process. They understand that even mistakes at the mint follow logic. Then, when you reveal the value, a few $100s instead of millions, they're still amazed, but they also learn realism. That's how you balance wonder with truth. At this stage, you can also reflect on the emotional journey of collecting. Everyone starts somewhere, with a handful of change, a gift, or simple curiosity. The 1973 cent is often one of the first coins people find because it's old enough to seem special but common enough to discover. Over time, that first spark becomes a hobby, a discipline, sometimes even a lifelong pursuit. Behind every seasoned numismatist is a moment of beginner excitement, maybe over a coin just like this one. That shared beginning unites the entire community, from casual finders to expert dealers. You might even bring in the poetic element of legacy, how collections outlive collectors. Many families keep albums passed down through generations, each coin labeled, each page telling a story. Someday, someone will flip through those albums and pause at the 1973 slot, running a finger over the protective plastic, imagining the person who placed it there. That quiet continuity gives coins meaning beyond material worth. They become bridges across time. When you narrate that kind of imagery, the passing of hands, the continuity of care, it turns your video into something deeper than a price discussion. It becomes a meditation on memory. If you've stayed with the story this long, you've already walked through nearly everything a simple cent could teach. Yet there's always one more layer to uncover, because the longer you spend with these coins, the more they start to mirror you. A collector's habits, patience, and curiosity become etched into the process, just like dies pressing metal. The 1973 cent becomes a meditation object, a reminder that value grows out of attention. Picture a quiet evening after filming. The lights are dimmed, the camera battery charging, and on the desk sits a single 1973 cent in a clear holder. Around it are the tools of the trade: magnifier, gloves, soft cloth, a little notebook filled with dates and notes. You turn the coin in your hand, thinking about everything you've learned. The copper glow seems warmer now, not just from the lamp but from understanding. You realize that what began as a rumor about an $82 million treasure has turned into a genuine relationship with history. That's how collecting matures. At first it's about excitement, the possibility of striking it rich, but over time it becomes about connection, about holding something that outlasts you. The 1973 cent is plentiful, yes, but each one still carries the fingerprint of its moment. It was made when machines were loud, when metal still mattered, when design was done by sculptors using clay and plaster rather than software. Those origins give it soul. The more you understand that, the more the hype fades and the deeper respect grows. Collectors who stay in the hobby often develop rituals. Some photograph each new coin as if documenting a friend's portrait, adjusting the lighting until every curve shows. Others write small stories on index cards: where it was found, the condition, what was happening in the world that year. These rituals turn the act of collecting into storytelling. When you weave that into a video, audiences sense authenticity. They see that coins aren't just bought and sold, they're remembered. Let's talk about display, because presentation is how the passion becomes tangible. A well-lit display case with simple backgrounds makes even a humble cent look like a museum artifact. Place a 1973 cent beside a 1909 VDB and a modern shield cent. Suddenly you have a timeline in miniature, more than a century of American design evolution condensed into inches. In your narration you can describe the visual contrast: the deep chocolate patina of the older coin, the reddish flash of the 70s copper, the bright plating of the modern zinc. It's a silent lesson about progress and continuity. From there you can expand into the science of preservation. Temperature, humidity, and air quality all play roles. Copper likes stability. Too much moisture invites spots, too little dries the metal and dulls luster. Serious collectors sometimes use silica packs or inert gas environments to slow oxidation. It's almost laboratory work, but with artistic purpose. keeping time still. That careful attention transforms a cent into a miniature conservation project. When you describe that process slowly and visually, the audience begins to see collecting as both art and science. And because every science invites technology, we can imagine the next frontier: digital archiving. Collectors now scan their coins in 3D, creating models that preserve every nick and ridge. Future historians may study those files long after the physical pieces have tarnished. The 1973 cent could live on as data, its surfaces immortalized in digital form. In your story, that becomes a metaphor, the fusion of past and future, copper and code. The coin that once rolled across diner counters might someday exist in virtual museums where anyone can rotate it with a fingertip. But even as technology advances, the heart of the hobby remains human. Walk into any coin show and you'll see that unmistakable energy. Small knots of people leaning over cases, magnifiers in hand, conversations flowing in shorthand about grades and dies. The smell of cardboard albums and the soft rustle of protective sleeves fill the air. Everyone there has a story that started with a single coin found by chance. When you speak about that community, emphasize how knowledge circulates freely. One collector's discovery becomes everyone's lesson. That shared curiosity keeps the culture alive. Now consider the emotional cycle of discovery. The first find brings euphoria, the research brings doubt, the verification brings clarity. Each step mirrors learning itself. The 1973 cent becomes a teacher disguised as currency. It shows that truth requires patience, that facts often hide behind fine details. The myth of sudden riches fades, replaced by satisfaction and understanding. You might even end a segment of your video with that thought, that the richest part of collecting is not owning something valuable but seeing something clearly. There's also a quiet humility built into this hobby. Every time you handle a coin, you're aware that countless others have held it before. It humbles you, connects you to anonymous lives. Maybe the cent once jingled in a soldier's pocket, or sat in a child's piggy bank, or helped make change at a grocery counter long gone. When you say those possibilities aloud, viewers feel time expand. The 1973 cent ceases to be an object, it becomes a witness. Toward the end of your long exploration, it helps to imagine what happens decades from now. Perhaps one day physical money will vanish, replaced entirely by digital credits. When that happens, these copper pieces will gain a new kind of rarity, not from vintage numbers, but from the disappearance of their world. The clink of metal, the weight of change, the casual gesture of handing someone a penny, all of that will become memory. And in that memory, the 1973 cent will stand as a symbol of the tactile era of value. If you return to the desk and look again at that single coin, you might notice how it catches reflections from its surroundings. The faint glow of your screen, the shimmer of the light above. It's absorbing the present even as it carries the past. That duality is what keeps collectors enchanted. The coin doesn't change, yet it constantly gains context. Every viewer, every researcher, every storyteller adds another layer to its meaning. Maybe that's why the idea of it being worth millions persists. People sense that something so small can hold endless stories, and stories feel priceless. You can end your long video series on a gentle note. Hold the coin up one last time and let it spin slowly between your fingers. The camera focuses on the motion, the blur turning into a copper halo. Then you speak softly, that in the end, the 1973 penny's true fortune lies not in market charts or rumors, but in the curiosity it awakens. Anyone who has looked closely at it has already earned something more lasting than money: perspective, patience, and a connection to time itself. When the spin stops and the coin rests flat on the table, you can let the silence linger a moment. The sound of stillness says everything. The ordinary cent, once dismissed, now feels monumental. And as the frame fades, your viewers are left with that subtle truth echoing in their minds, that sometimes the smallest piece of metal can teach the largest lesson about value, history, and what it means to pay attention. The room feels different now, quieter somehow, as if the story itself has taken a breath. You've spent hours exploring the 1973 cent from every possible angle: the weight, the design, the myth, the science, the emotion, and yet there's always one more dimension, one more echo of meaning. That's the beauty of objects like this. The deeper you look, the more they reveal, not because the metal changes, but because your perception does. What was once just a coin has become a mirror of time, culture, and human imagination. You can almost feel the pulse of history in its worn copper surface. You pick it up again, slowly, between your fingertips, letting the light catch on the ridges. The edges are faintly rough, softened by half a century of circulation, yet the outline of Lincoln's profile remains strong. There's a metaphor there: the persistence of ideals through erosion, the endurance of identity against the wear of years. The tiny letters, the date, the mint mark, all still legible, all still whispering, "I was made in 1973. That small sentence, if you listen closely, carries half a century of American life. When you hold that scent, you're also holding the moment of its creation: the whir of the Denver mint presses, the scent of heated copper, the rhythm of mechanical arms feeding blank planchets into dies. Each strike was an instant of perfect force, thousands of pounds pressing design into metal, locking an idea into physical form. It's astonishing when you think about it, how something so ordinary results from such precise orchestration. The machines that produced billions of coins also produced, unintentionally, billions of stories. In that sense, the 1973 cent is both anonymous and intimate. Billions were minted, yet each one experienced a unique journey, some lost in the dirt for decades, some sealed in rolls untouched, others handed back and forth until the details softened. Every cent tells its own unrecorded tale. Perhaps one lay in a drawer through the Carter administration, another fell between car seats during the first moon landing broadcast reruns, another waited in a vending machine that hasn't existed in 40 years. The imagination can't help but follow those trails. And when you let that curiosity surface in your voice, viewers feel it: the romance of the unknown, the humble poetry of circulation. There's also a certain philosophical irony in how people chase rumors of value. The myth of the $82 million penny captures attention precisely because it sounds impossible. Yet behind that exaggeration lies a genuine truth: humans have an instinct to search for hidden worth in the overlooked. The story of the 1973 cent becomes a parable of that instinct. We project greatness onto small things, and in doing so, sometimes discover real beauty. The coin doesn't need to be rare to be meaningful. It needs only to be seen. As your narration deepens, you might talk about how the cent has outlived countless financial systems, technologies, and trends. Through recessions and booms, wars and peace, through analog and digital transitions, it has remained constant. It's the most democratic of coins. Everyone, regardless of wealth, has touched one. That universality gives it symbolic gravity. Lincoln's face, reproduced billions of times, has been carried by children, workers, presidents, and poets alike. When you realize that, the cent feels less like money and more like a handshake across generations. Even the wear patterns on a cent tell subtle stories about human behavior. The right side of Lincoln's cheek often fades first, because coins rub against each other in rolls or pockets in predictable ways. The top of the memorial's columns on the reverse tends to flatten earliest, reflecting the physics of circulation. A numismatist reads those details the way an archaeologist reads sediment, as evidence of use, of movement, of human contact. To explain that on camera is to remind people that history lives not just in books but in the textures of ordinary objects. Now imagine pulling the camera closer to the coin again. You zoom slowly into the date, 1973, and let your voice soften as you recall what that year represented. It was a year of endings and beginnings, a crossroads in American spirit. The Vietnam War was winding down. The first cell phone call was made. Skylab was launched. Amid those monumental shifts, the U.S. Mint quietly struck over 4 billion pennies. The contrast is striking. While the world raced toward new technology and uncertainty, the cent remained the same: copper, calm, steady. It was the anchor in a world of change. You could continue by weaving in the human side of minting itself: the engravers, machinists, inspectors. Their daily labor, repetitive yet vital, ensured each coin bore clarity, symmetry, and integrity. They might never have imagined that decades later someone would study a single penny with reverence. And yet here you are, retracing their work, uncovering their craftsmanship. In that sense, collecting becomes a form of gratitude, a way of acknowledging the invisible hands behind creation. The conversation about value naturally circles back to rarity, and at this point in your narrative, you can revisit that idea with more depth. True rarity is not about mintage numbers alone, it's about condition, survival, and significance. Out of billions, only a fraction remain in pristine mint state, untouched by circulation. Fewer still possess unique minting quirks. And among those, only some capture the imagination enough to command extraordinary prices at auction. So when people hear about an $82 million penny, it's not the number that matters, it's the longing behind it, the hope that something forgotten could be extraordinary. This realization bridges the emotional gap between fantasy and fact. You can look into the camera and explain that while no verified 1973 cent has sold for tens of millions, the story itself is priceless because it keeps curiosity alive. Myths are not lies, they're the creative echo of wonder. Without them, the world of collecting would feel sterile. With them, every search through pocket change becomes an adventure. As the video nears its conclusion, the atmosphere should grow reflective. The music softens. The visuals slow down, close-ups of copper, light flares, maybe slow-motion footage of coins tumbling across a table. You speak more quietly, almost as if you're confiding in the audience. You tell them that this coin, this tiny piece of metal, represents persistence. It's a survivor of circulation, of history, of rumor. It doesn't need to be rare to be remarkable. It only needs to be noticed. You remind them that collecting, at its heart, isn't about profit but about presence, paying attention to the small things that most people overlook. When you look closely at a 1973 cent, you're really looking at time itself, condensed into metal. That awareness, that mindfulness, is what gives it value beyond markets. It's what transforms a hobby into a form of quiet philosophy. And perhaps that's the final message, that the coin's real worth is measured not in dollars, but in moments of awe. The $82 million legend might draw viewers in, but what stays with them is the feeling that something humble can hold the universe in miniature. The cent is a circle, a symbol of continuity. Every ring of copper connects us to those who came before and those who will come after. So when you end the video, you don't need fireworks or grand statements. Just let the camera linger on the coin resting still under the light. Let the silence do the talking. The coin gleams faintly, neither new nor old, simply eternal in its ordinariness. Then, with a slow fade out, your final words can drift like an echo, that the true treasure was never the rumored millions, but the discovery that even the smallest things can hold infinite meaning when you care enough to look. When the screen fades back in, the light is softer, almost evening light. The camera drifts across the surface of that single 1973 cent again. You can see tiny scratches that you hadn't noticed before, little glints where the copper catches and bends the glow. The voice resumes quietly, almost like thought made audible. You talk about how, for most people, value is measured by what can be traded, but for collectors, value lives in what can be remembered. A cent that once meant almost nothing can, through patience and study, become a key that opens a whole archive of memory. The smell of old albums, the dry sound of paper coin sleeves, the way your heartbeat quickens when you think you've spotted a doubled die under magnification, these things build a world. It's a world where every small discovery feels like a reunion with history. The 1973 cent sits at a perfect balance point between old and new. It's modern enough that you still find it in change, but old enough that each survivor feels a little miraculous. That twilight quality makes it special. Every year that passes pushes it further into nostalgia, into the era when phones had cords and photographs had edges. The copper holds that era the way amber holds air bubbles. You can sense the time trapped inside. You let your audience feel that through words and pacing. You pause, letting the sound of ambient music or the soft ring of a coin dropping onto wood fill the silence. Then you explain that this, right here, is the real experience collectors chase, the moment when object and memory merge. The 1973 cent becomes a time capsule, a witness that never speaks but never forgets. You might tell the story of someone finding one unexpectedly. Maybe a young student gets a 1973 penny in change at a cafe and notices the date, just out of curiosity. That curiosity becomes a search. What makes this coin special? Why do people talk about rare ones worth millions? They start reading, watching videos, learning about die varieties, luster, planchets. Within months, they're studying coins under a lamp late at night. The $82 million legend fades, replaced by something purer, the thrill of knowledge. That small narrative mirrors what's happened to so many viewers. They came for a rumor and stayed for fascination. You can transition from that story into the idea of legacy again. The coin that sparked their interest might end up in a small collection box, maybe labeled with neat handwriting. 1973 D. First find. Years later, someone else opens that box and feels the same spark. The act of learning never dies, it just passes hands. The scent keeps traveling, this time not through commerce but through curiosity. In a broader sense, the Lincoln cent is also a meditation on endurance. It has survived material changes, policy debates, and digital revolutions. It has been criticized, defended, hoarded, lost, found, and still it remains the quiet ambassador of everyday value. In that way, it reflects Lincoln himself, steadfast, humble, enduring through conflict and time. When you remind viewers of that connection, they begin to understand why this design has lasted longer than almost any other in American history. You could move then into describing what happens inside the mint today. High-speed cameras, robotic arms, automated quality control. The process that was once noisy and human is now precision choreography. And yet, when a new cent leaves the press, it looks just like the one struck half a century ago. That continuity is astonishing. Technology changes, but the image remains. Every new coin repeats the gesture of memory. This is where you might bring the narrative inward again, to what collecting teaches on a personal level. It teaches patience. It teaches respect for detail. It teaches that value often hides behind surfaces that most people ignore. When you apply that lesson beyond the hobby, to people, to ideas, to daily life, it becomes philosophy. The 1973 cent turns into a metaphor for attention itself. The more carefully you look, the more beauty you find. As the video drifts toward its closing cadence, you let your tone slow further, each sentence like a breath. You invite the audience to imagine setting a 1973 cent on their own palm, feeling the temperature of the metal, the smoothness of the worn fields, the faint edges of lettering. You tell them to think of everyone who might have done the same before them. That simple gesture collapses decades into a moment. Its history you can feel. Then, almost as a whisper, you say that maybe the cent was never about money at all. Maybe it was always about the idea of persistence. The assurance that something small, honest, and constant can endure in a world that keeps changing. That's the secret behind every myth of a priceless penny. Deep down, we all want proof that the ordinary can be extraordinary. As the camera pulls back one final time, the coin glows faintly under fading light. The scene softens into dusk. You let the music swell just a little, enough to lift the emotion but not enough to drown the quiet. Your final words are simple. That the 1973 penny's greatest worth lies not in a headline number but in the endless curiosity it inspires, generation after generation. The copper fades into shadow, the frame goes dark, and the sound that lingers is a single soft clink, 1 cent, one story, one endless circle of meaning. The screen fades back from darkness just once more, as if giving the story one last heartbeat before it settles into memory. The camera lingers on the coin resting still beneath the light, its copper glow now softer, almost aged by the weight of the tale we've told. The voice returns, low, calm, almost like the sound of thought more than speech. You say that every story has to end somewhere, but some don't really end at all. They just drift quietly into the next moment, like a penny slipping from one hand to another. The story of the 1973 cent is like that, endless, circular, quietly repeating. It began at the Denver Mint in a roar of machinery, and here it rests in silence, half a century later, still shining faintly, still carrying the imprint of Lincoln's face, still waiting to be seen. You think back over the journey. The weight, 3.11 grams of copper alloy, solid, familiar, honest. The design, Victor David Brenner's Lincoln portrait on the obverse, Frank Gasparo's Lincoln Memorial on the reverse. A temple within a temple, history within history. The symbol, not just a coin, but a promise, a nation's smallest measure of trust. The history, minted in a year of change, traded through decades of stories. And finally, the legend, the whispered rumor of impossible fortune, the idea of a penny worth $82 million. A myth, yes, but also a mirror reflecting the longing of everyone who ever dreamed that something ordinary could hold extraordinary worth. And as you breathe those words, you realize that's exactly what has happened. The coin did become extraordinary, not because of its market price, but because of its power to inspire. It turned curiosity into learning, rumor into research, attention into reverence. It taught patience to anyone who sat under a lamp, examining the date and the mint mark with a magnifying glass. It gave meaning to countless quiet hours of looking, comparing, wondering. The real treasure, hidden all along, was not the coin itself but the act of seeing. You speak about the idea of time again, because in the end that's what all coins measure, not just economic time, but lived time. Each cent is a fragment of a story, a small metal witness to everything that happened while it passed from person to person. It's been through laughter and loss, pockets and drawers, cash registers and sidewalks. Somewhere, maybe right now, another 1973 cent lies in the dark corner of a forgotten jar, waiting for someone to notice it again. That's what keeps the story alive, the certainty that discovery is always possible. The camera shifts slowly, focusing closer on the face of Lincoln. You describe the texture of the metal, the faint polish where the high points of the portrait have smoothed over years of handling. His expression remains calm, steady, thoughtful. The coin's designer once said that he wanted Lincoln's face to convey both wisdom and kindness, strength without severity. And somehow, in this tiny circle of metal, that intention survives. Every cent, no matter how worn, still carries that quiet dignity. It's the look of endurance itself. From there, you let the narration become almost a meditation. You talk about how this one coin connects everyone who has ever believed in value, whether measured in money or meaning. It's a symbol of continuity, of the human tendency to create lasting things out of fleeting ones. That's why even the smallest coin feels like a monument. The longer you look at it, the more it starts to resemble something larger, a window into how civilizations remember themselves. You might imagine what will happen to this cent in another 50 years. Maybe it will rest in a museum display, labeled simply, United States, 1 cent, 1973 copper. Maybe a child will stare at it through the glass and wonder what it was like to live in a time when money clinked, when value had weight and sound. Maybe someone will digitize its image, turning it into data so detailed that you could see every scratch and grain of metal under magnification. Maybe, in some way, this very coin will still be teaching people about the patience of looking, about the poetry of small things. And then you return to the present. The coin still sits there, quiet and real. The myth of millions doesn't matter anymore. You tell your viewers that stories like this remind us that worth is never just in the object, it's in the story we tell about it, and in the attention we're willing to give. A coin can't make you rich, but it can make you aware, and awareness, in its purest form, is a kind of wealth that never fades. As you prepare to close, the music begins to build just slightly, warm, slow, steady, like a heartbeat echoing through copper. You look into the camera and say that perhaps the greatest lesson the 1973 penny offers is humility. It teaches that no matter how small we feel, every mark we leave adds to the pattern of history. It reminds us that legacy is built one detail at a time, one life, one act of care, one cent. You pause then, letting silence stretch for a long second. You can hear the faint hum of the lights, the distant sound of your own breathing. The coin sits motionless, gleaming softly. You pick it up, turn it once more, and hold it between your fingers so the camera can see it clearly, front, back, edge, date. You say nothing for a moment, because the image speaks. It's enough. Then, finally, you smile and say, almost in a whisper, that maybe somewhere out there, another coin still waits to be found, another story waiting to be told. And that is the real magic of collecting, not the hope of a windfall, but the endless invitation to look closer. You place the coin back on the table, flat and still. The light fades slowly, fading from copper to shadow, from reflection to memory. The screen darkens, but your final words linger over it like an echo. That's the worth of the 1973 cent, not millions of dollars, but millions of moments. Not treasure, but time. And in the end, that's the greatest fortune of all. The music drifts away, the image dissolves to black, and the last sound, barely audible, is the quiet, certain ring of a single coin settling into silence.